Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. Hopefully, my voice is loud and clear. The title of tonight's episode is Important Acknowledgements of the Language Simulation. And so, I wanted to focus on at least my approach, kind of Mr.Within's approach to this plane of existence. And why even I have considered that language is a mass simulation. I feel language is like a multiplayer online game where everybody has a subjective characteristic in. And I have to begin by saying that what I'm saying here is from experiences born out of my eyes and the way I have contained reality. When I look at life, I see there's an objective realm, there's a subjective realm. I often repeat this in my talks because it's very crucial to establish. Because the history of our civilization and people is that they have not been aware that they are not language. It's like there was a time. There was a time where, let me say it like this, it's like, I think this is the experience of humanhood. The human experience is like this. You start off pre-language, you're a creature that you don't care about language at first. And then as we get indoctrinated or kind of conditioned into the patterns of individualism, being an individual, then language begins to be wielded. And you know, the first attempts of wielding language, it's kind of cool because it's as if a lot of children, young children, evolve from the stage of thinking, having others think for them, and then starting to make decisions of thinking for themselves. This is why I say parents all around the world should ask their kids questions rather than shouting answers to them. Because Galileo has this quote where he says, "You cannot teach a man anything, you can only make him realize it within himself." That means when you ask a question, instead of pointing at the person, you're pointing at the unknown. So the child, I personally have a conscious memory before I learned language. I was just sight in a room. I was just sight in thin air, guys, you know? Welcome to the chat section, guys. This topic that I'm speaking about, it's kind of like if I was Spider-Man, I'm trying to climb like the highest skyscraper known, like Burj Khalifa. So this concept is very huge because I'm pointing to a sort of historical shift, a shift in our history where human beings become conscious of language to a degree that they're not defined by it, but they observe it. So what I'm saying is this has been the whole issue. After object worship, idol worship, what happened? We go back, if we cast our mind back to the story of Abraham, this dude comes and sees in this house there's a bunch of idols. People are worshiping their own kind of pantheistic gods, you know. And so in that moment, Abraham comes and says, "These aren't real gods. These are like sticks and stones, guys. What is this?" You know, and people are like, "No, Abraham, these are our gods. Get out of here." And Abraham is like, "No, this is ridiculous." You know, Abraham is offended by this. You know? And so what happens? What happens is that all these people leave. All these people go, and one day they come back and they see that all the statues, all the idols were broken except one idol. And people come back and they see the statues beside, the hammer is beside one of the statues, and Abraham is on the other side of the statue. And they're like, "Abraham," you know, and he's like, "Yo." And they're like, did you do this? And Abraham's like, no, man, I didn't do this. The statue picked up the hammer and break all the statues. It didn't like thinking there's other statues. And then the people are like, no, Abraham, you did it. And Abraham's like, yeah, of course I did it. This is not all this whole thing's bullshit. And so really what I mean by that is that the people turned to Abraham and said, this idol can't break things. It doesn't have hands. And then Abraham's like, there. Then how could it be the ultimate source of everything? How could it be God? So we thought God was in objects at some point as a species. Okay. Then what happened afterwards? We graduated. We graduated to what? To language worship, to subject worship. And currently, till 2020, this has been continuing, and it's a bit scary. It's not a bit scary. It's a bit strange. Yeah, because a lot of things are strange before they become scary. you know? So many things are strange before they become scary. It's like the beginning of the deviation of that pattern from familiarity. So anyways, what I'm saying is that we used to worship objects, then we started worshiping subjects. And when we started worshiping subjects, we began defining with a certain abstract content of the moment than just purely with the observable materialistic content. And this is why I'm saying this is how many of the perceptions of human beings yeah, pretty much we began worshiping not just voices of others but voices of ourselves, you know and now why am I sharing this? Because it's an important acknowledgement to kind of realize why we are creatures and what relationship we have with language. I've written a very nice scientific work called The Alien Called Language, An Alien Called Language. And it sets off in the year, I don't remember what the year was, but it wasn't too far off. It was 2000 something. And human beings had messed up living on the surface of the earth, like earth was black. So they had no choice, and they were living on these sky cities based on magnetic technology. So they were trapped in the orbit of the planet, in sky cities, and not too far up, like above the clouds, but not like in space, and so in these sky cities, I created such like a fascinating kind of relationship with the characters. First of all, these sky cities are teaching the wrong history, and ever since like managing to come out, there was this one general who runs all the sky cities, you know. And this general, he was the only one who last second tried this extreme kind of plan B situation where they just lifted some cities into the atmosphere before the whole earth became devastated and could no longer be inhabitable. Could no longer be habitable, you know? So what happens is, this is the story, and in this story there hasn't been extraterrestrial contact with human beings yet. So I thought of creating a setting where human beings messed up their planet, and then extraterrestrial contact happens. That means extraterrestrial contact doesn't even happen on our planet because we messed up, you know, in that storyline. So what happens is, this general, I've made him kind of a general king. I wanted to kind of connect the idea of the sort of head of military with the head of kind of like, you know how they say, for example, the president is the commander in chief, something like that. But it's different. It's more like a general, but with a kinghood of like the ancient Victorian times. So it's a general. He's dressed like a general, but he's sitting, standing like a Victorian king. You know, I infuse the imagery. Anyways, so he's this guy is sitting, and the general has a son, and the son goes to these schools, and these schools, the story kind of is focusing. If this was a film, you'd be seeing a lot from it about his son who goes to school and every day comes and looks at the outer edge of the sky city, and he looks from the outer edge and he just sees this black earth, and he's just kind of thinking, what happened, what's there. It's like this mystery, and he was born on the sky city. Do you know what I mean? That means it's like he hasn't seen it. So that's the cool thing, that We don't take into consideration how many children of the future generations are being born in states where some of the ancient problems that we were trying to solve do not even exist as concepts to them. Because the environment really gives the voice at first to the person. So, anyways, what happens? This king is sitting in his throne, this general king, and out of nowhere, he's in his kind of chamber council, kind of like you think of Game of Thrones kind of throne like room. And out of nowhere, this alien suddenly appears where all of them get shocked. All of them get shocked, his councilmen, everything, everybody just steps back and it's like this paralysis of unfathomable shock. Like they can't believe what they're seeing, right? And it's this alien, and I thought of making the first alien extraterrestrial archetype that engages human beings to not be evil and messed up. Like, I don't know why Hollywood, I think it was more cooler to like, fight aliens with weapons, than to talk to them. But the thing is, in this story, the alien, there's no violence in that sense. This alien is an advanced alien from an advanced civilization from the Andromeda galaxy, I believe I wrote. You know, in a lot of my science fiction writings, there's this theme that the Andromeda galaxy is an advanced civilization. That means there's many advanced civilizations. But when I say advanced, not just technology wise, existentially. So anyways, so this being appears. This I don't remember what I wrote about how the being looks like, but it doesn't have a. It's kind of like a polymorph suit kind of thing, I think. But anyways, those morph suits or whatever, not polymorph, but morph suit. So anyways, what happens is this alien appears and they're all shocked, and the extraterrestrial scans in an instant. He's just like scanning the minefield of all beings there, and he already knows. And he suddenly starts talking in English. And these guys get shocked as if this alien appeared, scanned everything in the room, and started speaking their language to them. And they start talking, and the alien begins to say, "I've arrived to enlighten your species, your everybody in this, in all, every living being in this universal sector. Now that I've arrived, it's like I'm enlightening all of them to the clearest, highest elevation, right?" And so this is the story. This is the story where this general king suddenly sees this is true, right? There's no implication that this is not true in the story. And so what happens is the general king suddenly says, "What do we call," before, like I got excited because I was skipping, but the general king looks at him and they're all looking at him. They're like, "What do we call you?" And the alien looks at him. This is why the book's called An Alien Called Language. The alien looks at the general king and everybody there and says, "Call me language. Your minds is not advanced to fathom anything else." So he sees as if we're limited beings using it a language, just languages as far as we can intellect subjectively gaze upon the world. So he says, "Call me language. Your intelligence cannot surpass this technology." Now, what happens is the general king says, "Please, you have to teach my son before anyone else." Right? You have to teach my son. So this general king suddenly says, "Yeah, it's fine, you can enlighten everybody, but just you have to teach my son first." And this is where the whole movie begins, the whole story begins, where it's the conversations with that little kid who was looking outside of the Sky City with this alien called language. And the kid asks questions about himself, about the world. And I don't remember how I wrote how the questions were chronologically, but it was like the story had such nice architecture. Like anyways, what happens is, for example, the kid says, "What's down there?" Like to the alien says, "What's down there in the earth? Is there anybody down there? Any humans?" The extraterrestrial kind of scans, not robotically, but just, I don't know, intuitively scans, and says, "Yeah, there's a bunch of people there, but they have become so savage and beast-like that they will never incorporate in your societies." And the alien is indifferent. The alien is indifferent, so this is why he even agrees with the general king, because the ultimate outcome is the same. And eventually the questions are interesting, but pretty much the reason I was kind of drawn towards writing that story was that language is our limited technology. It is not the ultimate. So for us to think that everything we have to discover in this planet has to fit into this kind of sentences is a bit chaotic. It's strangely a bit impractical too. Because there's many domains of experience that really you cannot write it from language of one world. I've written something here that um, something about what's important to acknowledge of the language simulation. I've written confronting different speeds of subjective existence through conscious experiential attempts. So, what does that mean? That means language is dividing or classifying or is making multidimensional phenomena that is occurring singularly in the void. So, language is was that ability to see the other, to consider the other. This may sound chaotic, but for me, I speak of the inanimate fundamentalists and the animate fundamentalists. These are kind of terms that I've kind of developed to kind of suggest that the inanimate fundamentalists can is how can I tell you? It's like the cause of reality is lifeless for the inanimate fundamentalists. The cause of reality is filled with life for the animate fundamentalists. You know, these are concepts I've newly developed, guys. Bear with me. Recently it came to me. So sometimes I wish I had a whiteboard. I mean, I do have one, but there isn't an efficient way to kind of film yet. Hopefully, guys, my wish is to get a glass kind of board and put the camera behind it and write on that glass board as I talk. Like that would be a good setup, I think. So, anyways, this animate fundamentalist, inanimate fundamentalist, each one has a known and an unknown. You know, they have denominations. What does that mean? That means you can consider the source, the cause of reality, and only through language you can do this because duality is the realm of language. Anytime you think of good and bad, I'm telling you, you're in the linguistic simulation. Beyond the linguistic simulation, it's either pure singularity or it's the void, you know, or we can say a sort of infinite speed that moves towards a vanishing point. So if we kind of see that we were not just raised in a civilization with objective design, but a civilization with various subjective designs. And so, how would the person become responsible for thought? If that this is a deeper way of kind of asking it. You know, it's as if we were responsible for objects. It's like Abraham slapped the idols out of man's hand, and it was for that moment they were like, holy shit, maybe we should stop worshiping objects. Now I'm saying, when will the species be like, holy shit, maybe we should stop worshiping subjects? Because subjects can steal your mind from you. Sorry, not subjects that become beliefs. Subjects that it's as if you fear confronting how the world is changing, so you want to keep the world the same as it was. You know, this is the truth of life. You stay in your comfort zone too long, you bring shame to your soul. I'm kind of saying like There is a known self, there is an unknown self, there is a known observer of the known and the unknown self, and there is an unknown observer of the known and the unknown self. And with each self comes a world which can potentially be unknown. So reality is way more complex for us to write in a sentence. And this is really the depth that what it is like it's conceptual parallels and us realizing the language hasn't been made for it. I believe it was Einstein. He said genius is when two worlds that had nothing to do with one another, you suddenly find a link, an intersection, right? So it's you as a human being finding intersections between various ways the sense of self is projected and has moved observant in the space of observance, moved objectively, right? So as I'm speaking to you right now, how am I acknowledging existence of this moment? Right? So I acknowledge there's an objective existence. Yeah, the room, the world, my physical body, this glass, this bottle of iced tea in my hand. Like this is my objective realm. And I look at this objective realm, I look in the mirror, I see the objective self. And I see with this self cannot exist without being in a world. That means there needs to be somewhere to stand on before you can kind of move. Excuse me. So it's like the human being observing objective phenomena. Objective phenomena, if you feel like a mind projecting a body, will feel like given imagination. Clinical sort seems so. I'm pretty much saying it's like you look at human beings walking in the street. What do you see? You see physical bodies. What else do you see? You see unknown minds. And what do you see dwelling in their minds? Just like codes on the screen of the movie Matrix, on that computer screen, you see code. And what is this code? It is language. So we can say language is how we have translated reality into a sort of code that we can use. So we can say language, of course, it's like a sort of, I mean, of course, ultimately it's symbol attribution in the void. But thanks, guys. I am always happy to, for me, it's like there was a time where a lot of energy throughout the day would go to processing people's characters. There was a time in my mind where my mind sometimes was uh, more energetic than the moment, so I would animate character, you know. But then I realized after a bunch of experiences that nobody is ever who they appear as. Because not only appearances change, internal constitutions and ways that human beings have values, it's like that axis can shift. So pretty much, this is the way I've kind of attempted solving problems, and in 2011 onwards, my mind opened up to kind of existence in this way. I noticed something strange. There's some things that the person, it's like you are ultimately like born as a scientist, kind of in that regard. It's like, for example, you want to kind of, you know, look for clean dishes. Or let me say it like this: it's kind of like at some, in some sense, how do I say it? The mind appears as a field to the body. This is why the mind is something that's occurring simultaneously as objective reality, but the mind has an ability to change its own location. The body doesn't have that ability, or at least until the mind authorizes it. That means their legend has it that there were certain yogis in mystical traditions that these yogis had multiple bodies. So what do I mean by that? That means it's like one person saw the guy at the market, the other person saw him at the temple, and somebody else saw him like in the other side of the world in like a different country. And so it was as if they're like, how is this possible, you know? And of course, many things that seem impossible in a 2D dimension, in a 3D dimension, seem possible. So, what does that mean? That means if there is a relationship with matter that has nothing to do with the laws of matter, there can be a way that matter can move that has nothing to do with the laws of matter. You know, I often say, the world we live in and the world that lives in us. And 2020 onwards is the era of the advanced communicators. That means don't be aware how things are, reality is just objective. You have to consider how it is subjective. You have to consider what you are putting as a value and what is a value on its own. And you can't even distinguish between these values until you learn to confront the unknown void of the inner self. The unknown void of the inner self means before thought, what was there? So it's a raw acknowledgement of the presence of pretty much what is experiencing here. So it's as if your eyes, how can I tell you? It feels to me, meaning is not limited to language. And of course, this is something that has been discussed by certain professors of language. You know, I believe Steven Pinker was saying there was meaning way before there was language. That means it's like the person wanted something, but there wasn't words for it. But there was like language, you know, not language, but like the being would grunt, like the caveman would grunt or something. And even though that wasn't a language, but there was something, there was an expression and an attempt of the inner realms to slowly kind of break out into the outer. You know, right now we take it for granted that um, how much language is a part of our lives. Language is so powerful that you say a set of language to a person that they are not in agreement with, and they get angry. That's how powerful language is. You know, that's how powerful sound is, because ultimately people are not just wondering about how they're standing externally, but they're wondering about how they're standing internally. And when it comes to that internal self-inquiry, we're living in a civilization that has so many expectations, but it's inefficient. So you know what that means? That means it's kind of strange, but it's like humanity doesn't see its own greatness yet. That means anytime you see an inefficient system continue, that means no one has cared. Anytime you see a part of the world destroyed, it means literally not enough attention of human beings cared. You know. Now I was kind of thinking in the future. Of course, I don't have kids, but I was thinking if I had a kid, how would I explain the language simulation to my child? You know? And I thought I'd be like, probably I wouldn't explain it until I felt there was a need to comprehend it. But what I would say is that words have multiple meanings. That's it. That's the simplest way I can say this. That means you even look at the dictionary, and in this so-called very purely materialistic world we live in, our dictionary has a bunch of meanings for one word. The dictionary is more multidimensional than how we believe we're just a purely materialistic creature. There is unknown variables because there's pretty much the argument, the philosophical, I think the ultimate philosophical argument is that is the whole thing intelligent or is a little part of it intelligent? Then comes the deeper argument when we say the whole thing, do we even have access to the whole thing? Is the whole thing only our is the whole thing only our only just our inner realms? Yeah. Is it just our inner realms? So this has been my fascination that I feel I explained it like this. It's that it's like we are in language. The language simulation is a sphere. It's how sensory perception borders itself through abstract terms, symbols. I found it fascinating. Do you know right now, even though I'm a named being, like in my real name is Amin, Amin, like those four letters, you know? And these four letters, for me, are no different than any other letter in the language. That means I'm not saying that there came a point where I experientially saw that I am not the owner of my name, but I kind of realized that language is like what is how the mind dresses when it externalizes, when movement has to have extra added meaning. So what does that mean? That means, let's say two people spoke two different languages, but they were kind of talking to one another. And imagine, even though none of what they said made sense, they thought they were understanding what each other was saying. So you would see two people in two different linguistic programs, in two different ways that the culture has simulated language for them. You know, or I should say, language has also simulated culture. These two people are in the same world, in the same place, yet when they communicate, what they know is not from the same world. Each of them have their own inner disposition of a life they've lived. Behind your eyes, the experience of the whole moment of being can just become the presence of the whole moment of being. That means it's kind of like trying to give a definition to stillness. That's that when all those people ask, all those yogis, like every person in history who's ever went up to like a sage and said, "What is truth?" It's what is that kind of ultimate truth, enlightenment. It's stillness. It's the recognition that in pure stillness, the dual is no longer dual. The whole field resonates. That means if there was an asteroid, a meteor, about to hit this planet, and I had maybe like kind of 30 seconds before everything kind of vanished, I would probably just sit down, and for a second, maybe not even close my eyes, just sit down and look in the sky and start meditating on the meteor. No, what I'm trying to say is that you can step out of individual consciousness while you're even in an individualized body. Because once the subjective realms are freed, once an object doesn't have to kind of uh, chain a symbol to itself for the rest of its life in your mind, then reality becomes open in new ways. So if we saw the language that is being the edge of the definition of reality for people, the language that defines the mind of people, if we saw that language as a sphere, some people are outside of that sphere, some people are inside that sphere. Some people feel that what they're seeing in this is everything. It's as if they feel like, they see all the values. And some people look at the moment and they realize no, they see what they can process. If we were all data processors, we have different capacities, different capabilities. I ultimately kind of see like X-Men, the movie, got some part of this kind of theme right. But what really is that every spiral of DNA is like a hidden instrument that must become unhidden, that must be revealed. That's kind of the iridescence and the awe of life. That moment where you see something surreal, you know? For me, Terence McKenna speaks a lot about iridescence, but I'll tell you this. It's like I had a moment, a memory, which is one of those kind of early memories of my life. I think I was like maybe 7, yeah. And my family had gone to Iran, into this Shiraz in Iran, you know, and there was a sort of very unique, recently discovered kind of hidden architecture there. It's kind of cool. It's like, how people sometimes they excavate and they find dinosaur fossils. Some people excavate and find hidden buildings. You know what I mean? Hidden kind of um, halls and libraries. I remember as a kid, we go to this. There's this kind of someone like a tour guide, like a guide, guiding people slowly talking about different parts of this kind of very rare place, this rare location. And I remember as a kid, I started running. I started running ahead. I don't know. It was this weird thing that when I was a kid, in like when I would enter a museum, it's like for some reason I had this feeling of going to the end of the destination. So I would run through. Like I remember, like my family went to Portugal, and it was like I just quickly went in and saw everything, you know. And then just a quick glimpse at everything, like acknowledging every object that was there. And then at the end, even though I rushed through it, I had seen all of it. Then I slowly began walking and enjoying specific works. But, anyways, so what I'm saying is, I ran ahead of the guide, and I remember going to this kind of place, architecture of the building, where there was something like a chimney, but it wasn't like a chimney, it was too big for a chimney. It was like, it was kind of like if a chimney was as big as a couch, you know? So it was something like that, and it had this thing. And I remember I go there, and there was this light beam, and it was something, an insect. I saw this kind of thing hovering in the air that was like jellyfish, but it didn't have the like kind of spherical, half sphere kind of part of the jellyfish. And it was this kind of thing where this tiny insect that was just, I don't know how to say it. It felt to me it was an insect not from like this earth. And so I remember seeing this, and as I'm seeing this, right when I'm seeing this, the insect flies above the canal and starts just going up. And in that moment, it's like the people arrive with the tour guide, and I'm constantly telling my father I saw this next level thing. And my father looks down the shaft, but he doesn't see anything. You know, the shaft had like skylight above it, so technically, if the thing was white, you couldn't see anything but the light stuff. But anyways, it was a moment of iridescence for me. It was a moment where the unknown could be the unknown before I could put it into a box of knowing, or a box of contain it in a box of knowledge. Pretty much all human beings have two kinds of relationship that the conscious free will can have. It has a relationship with the known and it has a relationship with the known. Now, in the relationship with the known, if it is not content with what is, it will kind of try to escape it, and then arises the nihilistic trap and the enlightenment trap. That means the person doesn't like how they're experiencing life, so they want to jump into it being either empty or it kind of being this endless escapism into like higher dimensions. It's like weird. It's like people just want to get out of here. When you look at the religions, people are like, "Yeah, I just want to get out," get out, get some eternal fresh air. When we treat language as a technology, that's why I like the term simulation. You know, the language simulation is literally a world inside a world that we're all acknowledging to be living in, where we're all individuals and names can be tagged to people. But I feel an advanced civilization will be a civilization where the members of that civilization are living in advanced ways. An advancement for a creature that has an inner life and an outer life means that there's two types of advancements you must seek. One is the efficient vision of the external realm, and the other is the efficient vision of the inner realm. Now, the inner realm means you realize, to you at least, what the value of your own experience is. That means every person has different eyes, and that means it's like Uncle Ben telling Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. With vision that is so unique your eyes have, that vision deserves to kind of go to civilization. That means really think about it this way. Every idea every person has had, you know, it's like something they're holding. And what happens when a person grows older? They want to pass on the torches that they have held high, you know? Because this is what the philosopher understood. Like, it was kind of hilarious, guys. Imagine a philosopher back in the day like Socrates, and imagine just an average blacksmith, right? Now, the blacksmith was working much harder than Socrates and went and told Socrates, "Why do you sleep so much? I work every morning, every day so hard." And Socrates would remain silent. And eventually, history would prove that that blacksmith worked hard, but he worked hard only in the external realm. Socrates worked hard in the inner realm, and that's why we remember him even in 2020. Because he realized where the value of the intelligence is, and it is a liberation of experience from conditions of existence programmed by language and various other programs. When I say programs, that means really civilization is a stage where we're being actors, and that means you can't truly yourself outside of your home. Like what? Let me tell you, not that you can't be truly yourself. I'm just saying that when a person does any action, they pilot through an archetype, and that archetype is inspired not only from the voice of the environment, but also from how their own voice appears to them. Do you know how they see their own value system as significant or not? I think this is a good symptom for people to be careful when life is feeling repetitive. That means there is more of an opportunity to suddenly change. I don't know how to say it, but I think boredom can lead to enlightenment. It's like, if there was a yogi in the classroom and this kid daydreams and the teacher's like, "Stop daydreaming, Billy," and in that moment the kid's like, "I'm bored, god damn it, I'm bored." The yogi would come and shout, "This kid is enlightened." Would look at the teacher, it's like, "Don't disturb this kid, he's bored." That means he's seen something, and yet his attention has moved on beyond it to other things. So for me, when I see, for example, a professor speaking in an auditorium full of students, what is that? That is literally one chemical, one subjective chemical and entering various other different chemicals and having various different chemical reactions in people's minds. So what does that mean? That means all the vast imagination of every person listening in that auditorium is kept hidden in the inner realms and not utilized, and only the voice of the professor is heard. You know, because there is no student teacher, guys. There's just the value of vision. We are creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere, for God's sakes. Like, language was sparked like fire. You know, it's honestly a technology. And when we think we are it, it's like Tony Stark in Iron Man suit thinking he's the Iron Man suit. Like, can you imagine that? Like, his wife comes to him. It's like, Tony, what the fuck? Get out of there. And Tony Stark's like, no, there is no Tony. Call me Iron. you know. Officially, Tony Stark changed his name to Iron Man. Last name Man, first name Iron. That's so silly. Oh my god. But what I'm saying is pretty much the suit is the vehicle is being treated as the actual body, and that's kind of unprofessional, mystically speaking. There's really, like, when you really think about it, really ultimately, let's forget let's just go to the very basics. What can a human being do on this rock? Like, what can a human being do in existence? Really, really. Now, they can choose to just exist. So, what that means is, first, let's say there's a dynamic of something seeing something else. This is very preliminary to any kind of discussion. That means we need to have some sort of character in the story to wonder about how this character in the story moved. Right now, I'm ultimately saying that there's a transition. there's a transition between collective perspective. So the same way you can say the inanimate philosopher can also the inanimate fundamentalist can also see, for example, if that inanimate phenomena was singular or collective. I think the inanimate philosopher would not see this individual and the collective because it's just nothing. It's vacuum-like, But the animate philosopher can see it to be individual or collective. And what has occurred, That means sometimes I have so many thoughts. Sometimes when I look at all these talks I've given, I'm like, oh my God, what am I? Am I like, the god of the language of my mind, like creating all this? And then I realized, no, it's that language spoke before silent experienced it. And that's why the kind of enslavement, it's like, I'm telling you, people are way more freer than any thought they have. It's a return to direct experience rather than indirect ideology just being a mask for our intellects, for the intelligence of our civilization. That means really, like, what is intelligence ultimately? It's movement in space. Now, we are creatures that everything in the space is, of course, moving, but we kind of see that we can consciously be aware of some parts of it. So our free will is kind of strange. When it comes to the subjective self, your free will is purely free. You are completely free. But when it comes to the objective realms, how can the free will be free? Can you instantly change how you look like? Can you shapeshift as a person? No. You know, maybe in the future when people become robots they can, nanotechnology kind of like shifting, but and ultimately, guys, if one was to change the terms success and failure, it would just be simplicity and complexity. It's fascinating. It's like just like game theory that what was his name? How have I forgotten this man's name? Um, Sorry guys, just give me a second. I gotta search something. Oh, there we go. John Forbes Nash. You know, so John Nash, he kind of came up, I believe. Let me just double check this, guys. Hold on. Okay, there we go, guys. I found it here. So it says John Nash was an American mathematician who made fundamental contributions to game theory, differential geometry, and the study of partial differential equations. Nash's work has provided insight into the factors that govern chance and decision making inside complex systems found in everyday life. So, similarly, guys, I'm seeing a sort of game theory to the symbolic attribution of kind of how we link subjects with objects. There is a game theory. Everything in this life has design. Ultimately, if you want to see beyond what the emotional realm, now I tend to not speak about the emotional realm because it speaks for itself when it arrives. But I'll tell you this, it's like game theory to how subjects and objects are linked. And I'm realizing that imagine what would it mean, people being aware of the language threshold, people being conscious of the subjective realm. That means person A would be talking to person B, and regardless, imagine person B came to person A and was like complete, like hostile, subjectively hostile, like very rude or whatever. Person A now, before he thought he was language, would get angry, would be like, how dare you say these words into my ear? But it becomes something where it's like now when you're aware of the subjective realm, you let it be. Sometimes indecision is an advantage, kind of like what's his name? Sun Tzu in The Art of War. He says, kind of when your army's close to the enemy, make the enemy feel it's far away. And when you're far away from the enemy, make them feel you're close so they stop advancing. And there is parallels to this in regards to what I'm saying here. So it's kind of like this, guys. The more advanced our language has become, the more we have been able to see parallels to the world subjectively, which means the more artificial the world has become. And if we think we're the language, we get the language changes. Just like how your physical body in this world has been changing as you've been growing. Similarly, the language and the content of one's mind changes. This is why, for me, some people, when I mean, I understand memory. I understand that people can entertain very advanced, abstract structures of kind of way their subjective realms are. Every person's mind has hidden geometrical kind of subjects. As the Tibetan Buddhist would say, it's kind of like an inner treasure revealing to realize the value of experience and existence. we have to re-engineer our language, our experience of language. The reason I speak of the, I mean, I haven't spoken about it officially as a talk, but I do have opinions on how the brain chemistry of the human being will shift in the future generations. And it's going to become a kind of thing where we're going to see it took us billions of years to attain a sort of sober state of function, but then it's going to become a way of, it's not like people just internally trying to change the inner constitution, but it's they're going to have external methods. The whole psychedelic community is just inspired towards this, for example, that we use an external process to change the inner realms. But is that if you choose to claim that you have free will, the free will has to be originating. How can I tell you? It's like the inner and outer after some point. Um, Beyond the language threshold, there is no inner and outer, but there is intelligence. And this intelligence, you can say the same way our body is intelligent right now, it can move. In that state, it would be as if your whole moment of being is like your body. And then the mind is standing in an unknown kind of uh, podium, place. So to kind of climb back up to what I was saying earlier, we start simple because if we cannot comprehend the simple or have some sort of relationship with the simple, then our relationships with the complex will become confusing. So inevitably, we'd have to come back to the simple again. So it's as if Elon Musk, of course, someone who says this, it's like he says simple principles are crucial. That means when you're thinking about the possibility of solving something, a problem or a task or whatever, you got to see it. Okay, the problem is complex, sure, but if you were to look at the problem and wonder how are you defining, how you for yourself are defining the complexity, it's another way of saying you really, for one time, it's like, sure, there's suffering in this world, but for a second just pause and wonder how are you defining the suffering, and then go kind of wonder how the complexity arises from simpler views. There is a kind of, I don't want to say bias, but sometimes in the subjective realms, you'll things can animate, and you'll suddenly notice certain elements in your subjectivity are reflections of certain objective things that are around. You know, language is very powerful. Sorry, guys, this was on mute for like 3 minutes. And I was still talking, but, anyways. What can sound be but the paint of an inner realm drawn on an outer canvas? We are objects until we realize this object can move in accordance to subjectivity. And we thought we're subjects until we realize the subject comes and goes. So then comes the depth and the kind of deep wisdom of kind of like, okay, what is here? And Sri Ramana Maharshi, this very realized mystic, he said, let what comes come, let what goes go, see what remains. And that seeing is a sort of ultimate. For me, I've personally experienced my consciousness as, I created a term for it even, as empty seeing, or it's like seeing in emptiness, like the emptiness and the sight are the same moment. So awareness is unconditionally present, but self is conditionally present. The self that we experience objectively, it's held by the conditions of the laws of the cosmos and the universal sector. But the awareness to the self, which in every moment has been present, the unconditional center point to every degree of memory. That means some people, I think they classify their memories as if like a file cabinet or like linearly. For me, all my memories center, they're like lines, they're like the radius, you know, to the central point of the circle, which is unknown. So some people, it's like, for me, when I look at life, knowledge is orbiting around an unknown presence. And that's kind of the privilege of existence, to see how else your eyes can roar. The unknown is the common denominator to all knowledge. It is the space where knowledge moves in, and to fear the unknown is to kinda fear where everything is standing. I feel like reading a poem for you, from my poetry selection, and it's from a book called poetry book I wrote in 2015 called Endless Roads. And I feel like reading number let me see, 25. Let me find this. Is there even a 25? 26? Yeah, there's a 25. Okay, so 25 is it. These are kind of mystical hymns that I kind of went on a writing spree in 2015. Like, my experience with writing is like giant bursts. Like, there's sometimes I it's no inspiration for writing. Sometimes there's like giant bursts of kind of like, you know um, awareness to the movement of ideas in accordance to a sort of axis of self. So, anyways, this poem is called "The Light in the Room." Shining stars cannot lie to the wolf that has learnt to howl at the moon alone. What makes a man an independent unit of mankind? How does lightning strike itself in an instant of wrong? All choices have their own paths too. Even the number one cannot deny the work of number two. When duality and unity dance, how do the lost find the found? The mastery of the navigation between the formless and the formed worlds is that the lover has given herself to the love of her choice. How vicious can a snake's cage be without the snake? A picture of a cake will net a picture of a cake will never satisfy an empty stomach. In reality, we must seek the wisdom of being before the doer forgets the faith of an existential cosmos. Love the kind in the kindest way until you notice the self spacelessly. The light in the room does not judge the shadows. Emanation has only one path. The source of existence was yours and is yours at last. So that's number 25, guys. I'm gonna open it up to the people, anybody in the audience. I'm gonna read one more so people can just suggest a number, and the first number that comes, I'll read that poem. But you gotta choose between 1 to 26 and 25. I just read it. So pretty much, guys, suggest a number. This is the audience engagement part, you know. Okay, so clinical sword. I'm gonna choose one. We're gonna read the first poem ever. Let's see. Not the first poem ever, but like the first poem of the Endless Roads. It's a good one, actually. Let's read it. It's called Your Divine Remembrance. Who seeks truth? Who seeks the truth? When the truth seeker has become emptiness on a rock in emptiness? Who seeks the truth when the truth seeker has become emptiness on a rock in emptiness? We all want doors that revolve around us. Why are the broken trying to fix up all that they see? Life has brought us to our end so we can comprehend our beginning. Sometimes words write themselves into worlds more transcendent than names. Have you realized you are your divine remembrance? You know what, guys? I'll read 13 and 20. You know, let's just see what they are. Because those numbers are, it's like any other number could have been instead of those. So let's see what they are. 13. 13 is the poem is called The Only Manifest Glow. 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 Give your light to all you can see, just like the center of the only manifest glow. Love is wise, for finding fault is the work of the past. The serenity of reality is a calculation beyond dominion. The ego is a net that must be torn or thrown away by clarity's hand. Honesty does not lie to other or self. What is free beyond form? If you know, if you know the moment changes, if you know the moment changes, love your whole. So WHOLE. So it says, what is free and beyond form? If you know the moment changes, you love your whole. It's like, you see, it's kind of the ultimate evolution of the personality into realizing the whole moment is where the design is finding itself existent. So it's kind of strange. We are like, this is a very strange metaphor I'm going to use, but it's like, those whales that swim and there's fish around them that swim around the whale. Our thoughts are like those fish. And the whale is like the direct experience. So it's like, I can totally see how the thought can, like, when I look at an object, that object for me can be the thought. Like, this object has become like the word bottle. I'm holding like a bottle of iced tea in my hand, so like, this has become these words. So when I look at the object, it is the word, right? And sometimes when we look in the mirror, we notice we are our name, right? So everything has been branded through symbolism, abstract symbolism. Language is artwork. All right, guys, this is the last one I'm reading. We're going to read 11. Let's see what it is. Who chose you? So that's the name of the poem. Who chose you? A tree must not doubt the seed of its fruitful progress. Divinity dances because assumptions roam freely on the tongue of man. Many years have passed, but what has changed? I thought I was smart, but then I realized it is all the wit of God. Oh wait, how about the will of God? Could two eyes see the same just to transcend the blame they cannot tolerate? Acceptance is the key to all doors. Who chose you before all choices? And guys, I'm going to read one more, which is, it's something I felt. I'm going to read the last poem, number 26, and I think this is one of the best poems I've ever written. I'm like, anyways, I'll read it for you. It's called The Rice Field. A lady for 80 years bent down every day to pick up rice. At the end of her life, she had one message to her daughter: before you eat, remember my breath in every grain of rice. So I'll read that again. A lady for 80 years bent down every day to pick up rice. At the end of her life, she had one message to her daughter: before you eat, remember my breath in every grain of rice. The effort of all those who have lived, the spirit of their vision that echoes in the civilization we have adopted currently. If intelligence seems to be occurring behind our eyes, then it is the responsibility of that intelligence to conduct what's in outside. So that means it's like a subjective being with an objective purpose, or an objective being with a subjective purpose. Those people who want to transcend this dimension, this plane of existence, they're like objective beings with a subjective purpose. So their whole metaphysical constitution becomes about like, if the guru was gonna diagnose something, like the guru would say, it's probably the person has to confront um, the source of objectivity. What if it's the other way around? If you feel you're a subject and reality is meant to go towards objectivity, it's kind of like the person's belief system shifts the texture of reality into either a solid state, liquid state, or gas state. So those people who think of reality in like a gas state, they kind of feel that the field it's a field of intelligence moving the particle, and the other feels it's a particle moving the fields into like how what the field is. So really, it's a multidimensional position. There's nothing as surreal as reality, really. Like it doesn't get stranger than a rock in the middle of nowhere, you know, with trillions of stars and galaxies and celestial movements. It's like it's too unreal. Reality is unreal, in other words. I could totally see how Chung Su, the Zen master, freaked out when he had a dream he was a butterfly and he thought he's a butterfly dreaming he's a Zen master. Anyways, guys, the importance of acknowledging the language simulation is, in other words, kind of wondering about the velocity of vision, its speed, and its kind of direction. The speed of vision is how is when something becomes important for you, it gains speed, you know? And you can say any sort of acknowledgement of reality must be directed. So what it is when the eyes open, it's a character in a video game kind of experience of life. But when the person is asleep and they are in a dream state, it's a character in a video game, but it's as if the body is inactive, but the mind is still living. So you can say dreams are kind of when the mind is awake, but the body is asleep. You know, when the mind is simulating the experience of reality. I've consciously moved in my dreams. I woke up and it like blew my mind. It blew my mind how, like, even if my body doesn't move, the mind can simulate realms where I have a body in. So I realized just subjectivity is like how the attention in the moment provided through the subjective condition is moving towards a sort of subjective unconditional power, the power to extract. So this extraction ability, um, I guess, a sort of deduction. You know, this mode of mind to look at something and realize every part of it can have a significant meaning. You know, this is why we have so many different specific fields in the medical practices. You know, some people are heart surgeons, some people are brain surgeons. You know, it's for me it's fascinating because it's like it's not. I mean, on some level, it is a divide and conquer strategy. You know, it's like we can say our knowledge is us kind of claiming dominion over the unknown, us saying what is here when there's so many things that are here and they're all changing too. Like, I think a person is a philosopher when they are not afraid of the implication of the unknown. A civilization where people are aware of their subjective realms. People are aware that not everybody has can understand. Like when you have this mentality that you want to be understood by the world, I don't even know how that's possible. You know, but the mentality, if it is that it's kind of like you are seeing something and others are seeing something, and the whole point of the mind and speech and communication is for this design to be used, That means it's like the purpose of life is in the design of the moment. And when you look at the design of the moment, conscious energy is being conscious of itself, pretty much. And so it classifies itself. So a species that evolves beyond language will be a species that is speaking the language of values, ultimate values. So what does that mean? That means it's like I don't know, this is probably going to happen maybe in I don't know how long. I don't know how long. Like a part of me can say like it can potentially happen in the next 50 years, or it can happen in the next 400 years. I don't know, you know? But if we kind of look at the problem, like how the civilization is moving now and evolving now, what it is as more people enter the system, there are more approaches, many approaches to the system. So it's kind of like realizing imagination has a hidden value when you're trying to solve the problems in reality. Perhaps this is why Albert Einstein said that imagination is the sign of true intelligence. What does that mean? That means the ability to see how something can be something else. The direction of life is how experience provides access to certain engagement with phenomenology. And it's like, I think our species is kind of moving towards an advanced direction because people, when they sleep, they don't freak out. They don't freak out when they sleep. People sleep in the most calmest, loveliest way with a warm smile and a warm blanket, and they're like, this is blessed sleep. But on some level, if imagine a philosopher sees this, it's like, oh my God, that person is leaving the conscious state. That person's every idea that person had for that day is entering the void. The philosopher could be freaking out. And then the philosopher gets tired and sleeps. But really, but really what I'm saying is values have to evolve. They have to evolve beyond their current structure. What is this? It's like that's the whole point of the new. I feel we have the civilization has to remodel itself, and if we can't change the past, at least we can create the new, and the past can have commentary on it. I feel we should create a yin yang balance. We should build a civilization that is on one level traditional and on one level non-traditional. So we have, for example, a progressive country, and suddenly it's as if inside the center of that country, it's like some of the nations of it are, how can I say it? It's like a yin yang balance. You have the black and the white chunk, and you have the white and the black part. So I'm saying it's kind of us realizing a maintenance of civilization 1.0 and civilization 2.0, because I see that everything occurs in a strange way dualistically. We have two hands, we have two legs, we have two eyes that see the same moment, right? So duality is a part of our existential biological design. Right now it's kind of strange because we don't have two hearts, we don't have two brains, you know and I don't want to give a commentary on other species, but I'm saying ultimately when we look at the external behavior of the body, it's as if the internal constitution is very different. It's like some parts of the body are symmetrical, some parts of it are not, and that kind of is a bit odd. It's as if it's like it was the handiwork, unfinished handiwork, unfinished divine handiwork. When I was younger, I would kind of think God was an inventor, and the greatest invention an inventor can make is an invention that endlessly makes the greatest invention. So God kind of found a way to make a temporal process into eternal, or of course, I'm not saying this in a sort of derogatory way. For me, you can't really get angry at language. You can't really get angry at concepts and ideas. You only get angry at concepts and ideas if you feel the person who is using them is not conscious of what's in the environment, you know? So imagine we experience this. We experienced this a couple. So think of it this way. Let's say you want to be a person who can, in regards to writing, let's say write a perfect sentence. Anytime you get a thought, you want to write a perfect sentence, and let's say you want to take it to a level where it's instantaneous. So what that means is you don't have to necessarily, even if the paper's in your peripheral vision, you can perfectly. It's like through. It's like they're after you write a lot, there develops a sort of invisible muscle memory where just when you it's like behind your eyes you see a film and your hand already knows subconsciously how to turn it into language. Not that it knows. I don't want to fragment the human body's relationship with itself. I'm just saying that it's like um, there was this poet named Rumi. He spoke about the human design as an instrument, as a sort of straw where air. This kind of like it's like the free will is an instrument of the divine will. The divine will to the free will is it. That means the free will it can't if it acknowledges the divine will truly. There's two options: either it is the divine will or it doesn't exist, and the divine will is only there. This is why in so philosophical domains, religious mind people, I find religiously minded people, they don't want to perceive greater subjective designs, because if they do, they can be suggestions that what they are, the subjective allegiance they have is untrue. So that's kind of, I don't want to say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's still a attachment to language. So I'm kind of like that guy in history who's like, okay, I see totally. History is all this language that has developed. But when it comes to experiential reality, to the living part, to the life form, when it comes to the life part, we don't just look at the form subjectively. That life part transcends the form, ultimately implying that human beings we are not just individuals, we're a field of intelligence. And perhaps in the future, I've kind of some written about this in my writings that in my writings, I've written about how it's kind of like every person who has ever considered something on the other side of the veil of thought, as if an angel, guide, some form, shape, extraterrestrial, um, kind of woo woo archetypes, as certain secular people would say. So, all these things that have been kind of considered, I saw the relationship of the concept of, for example, I got to choose one here. I'll choose the concept of the guardian angel in traditional thought. The concept of the guardian angel, for me, I had this question when I was younger, and like a way, like my father was uh, spiritual ideas um, were familiar to me at a young age. Strangely, like it was in the environment, discussions of it. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is as one train of thought leaves, the other arrives. Guys, what I'm saying is I saw the oh, there we go. Thanks for reminding me in the chat section, guys, what I was saying. Um, yeah, this concept that the guardian angel is a collective future self. So that's why kind of the angel knows because it's you in the future. I had this kind of mentality, and then I thought, what would that you in the future be? And I thought the only way this kind of guardian angel could be this collective thing is it's like our future self is God. When I say God, I mean it's literally the evolution of individual consciousness so that it's indistinguishable from collective phenomena. So it's like the evolution of a particle in a field into the field. So it's kind of like what I'm saying is like in that kind of theoretical vision I had, it was as if the guardian angel is your future self, but the future self of everybody is like an ocean. And right now we're experiencing our selfhood as a stream, as like a river. When I say guardian angel, let me tell you this something that that came to me early on. I'll say this to you, CS in the chat section. When I say concept of a guardian angel, the way I told you was that in my youth that idea was around, and when I was younger, I had this theory that the guardian angel was the future self of the person, because everybody was talking about past lives. I'm like, how could there be past lives without future lives simultaneously? It's like the past and future are codependent. So my mind kind of linked the two ideas that the guardian angel was the future self, and if it was the future self, it would explain how it would know where to be or when how to guard or guide. It would already know the moment before it happens, so it has control over the moment. You know. So I don't know. I had this kind of like thought back then, but for me, no. I'll tell you this. I don't feel like something that came very early on to me was that it's like don't create a personality for the unknown, because then you get attached to that personality and then your mind becomes conditional to subjective image. So the best thing is kind of just like in any moment where the complexity seems uncertain, kind of wonder about the simple certainty. That simple certainty is ultimately how your experience is navigating it. So your attention, I'm saying, if you are a person, as like it's kind of, let me tell you, it's like on some level, I'm saying that at the core of our intelligence, it's an attributeless presence of attention that's in an instant. And because it's in an instant, it's not dualistic. It has nothing to refer to this instantaneous expression. So it's attributeless. But then I'm telling you that on some level, like when this kind of idea of the guardian angel and the future self, and this has to do with the various dimensions that the person entertains of the immediate constitution of the world. That means there's this thing I said, one's principal universal philosophy. That means ultimately, how has this human being interpreted emptiness and fullness, the known and the unknown? And if the unknown is just ignored, that means you're also ignoring the unknown aspects of your own intelligence. So the best thing to do is that when a person realizes they have blind spots, is to look at the moment through different degrees of perception. Our relationship with language will change as we acknowledge that certain percentage of the language is our doing. We have brought it into motion, and certain a percentage of the content of the language that is in a person's mind, it's the voice of your ecosystem, the voice of your environment. And it's so important, especially for every human being, to just be able to distinguish between what is the voice of the environment and what is the voice of your articulation, of your eyes looking at things. I'm telling you, I was a, in my youth, like in high school, I'll tell you, grade 9, like I was a person who I was kind of one of those guys who was open to copying. How can I tell you? Like I didn't care for the class because anything anybody doesn't care, they're willing to achieve it by the least effort. So the least effort is to see what the effort of others have attained. So I had this mentality, but then I realized that when it came a situation where I remember it was like in my calculus class at the end of my high school, where it was that was a moment where it's as if I didn't need to depend on anything outside. The inner realm knew how to handle it, as if in that moment I was kind of familiar with the course. So there was a totally different feeling. I don't know how people, all those people who are like believers of an ideological system, I don't know how because really it's like there's a totally different feeling of following and of creating. Some people are looking for truth, so their whole intelligence is not engaged. They want it to come to them. But the value of the whole divine part of life is that free will can go to the world. That means we are kind of like creatures that can have some sort of engagement. I mean, it's fascinating when you look at, for example, the intelligence of animals in jungles, in nature. You see they're limited, they're bound by the program of the ecosystem. The ecosystem is the mind of the animal. When you take the animal out of its ecosystem, it starts to deteriorate to itself, right? It starts becoming some abomination of nature. This is why animals that are not in their natural environment, they don't meet their evolutionary design. Now look at something even more interesting. We are also evolutionary animals, and we have shifted. There was a time where a person, they would walk around throughout the day and they would see nothing else but trees. Now it has come a time where people don't even care about the tree, you know? A tree could have the greatest fruit and the person's going to be like, I'm too busy to pick this great fruit, you know? So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. The concept of these concepts, I'm going to name them: the objective evolution, the subjective evolution, the language threshold, the linguistic simulation, and the language simulation. You know, and in some sense, piloting of the direct experience that is attributeless instantaneously. These are things that I'm definitely going to get more into, but these are all suggestions that that next evolutionary relationship we're having beyond creatures of thought is creatures of experiential rhythm. And it means that our collectivity is not in our static acknowledgement of self, it is in our dynamic acknowledgement of the world. So a civilization built not on values of individuals, but what all individuals can value. A civilization where the child wakes up and it's like, holy shit, I can't wait to go advance this, you know. But we're not living in that kind of civilization. When I remember it, it breaks my heart every time I walk in the downtown area of anywhere, and it could be the most beautiful like kind of architecture or whatever, but still it breaks my heart because when you see something better and it is not done, it's as if a world is being left to die. Your greater potentials of what you could have done and what you can do in every moment are, it's as if they're not attended to. It's as if kind of like if you cannot attend to, if it's, I remember like a friend of mine, he felt guilty for something he had said, uh, kind of in this interview that had happened, right? And he felt extremely guilty, and it was like he had gone on this kind of loop of endlessly trying to vocalize his suffering of this story and what happened to him, right? And I kind of noticed it's as if um, every moment is an opportunity for expression. And if the person is aware that there is choice, the whole point of choice is the piloting of the imagery. So it's kind of like I'm saying we can't really use language, we can't really use language until we're aware of it. Like you seriously, like you can't use something if you can't see it, right? So this is why it's more important to see first in a non-judgmental way, and then see how the content in the moment can be judged, or various patterns can be kind of seen. Just like in topology, we have like a kind of random shape, and we're trying to find linear relationships in this kind of non-linear abomination. you know So it's this is the fascinating thing. Either meaning is hollow or meaning is beyond this dimension, true meaning. I'm going to share one last story before I end off. This story is a Zen story, and I remember reading it online. And the Zen story is this: that there's this guy sitting on a grass field meditating, this kind of Zen monk, and he suddenly reaches such a decent, simple moment in his life where he suddenly realizes a truth about nature. And the whole point of this is called self realization. So, what does that mean? That means there's something happening. You're just realizing the self, how the self is here. That means it's already there. Every truth that the person wants is there, but it's the self that's the access point to it, you know? So that's why they call it self realization, kind of trying to discover your realize through the self, through how the self is appearing as the moment. So this person sits on the grassland, and his simple decency kind of takes him to a sort of experiential witness where he realizes something deep about the nature of reality. And as the story goes, there's a dark minion. The story just says dark minion. There's this dark minion who sees this and freaks out. He's like, "Holy shit, this guy just realized something." And the dark minion goes to the Dark Lord and says, "Dark Lord, this man just understood more about the truth. What do we do?" And the Dark Lord tells him, and this is the moral of the story. The Dark Lord tells the Dark Minion, "Don't worry." And the Minion's like, "Why?" He's realizing the secrets beyond the simulation, you know, beyond the self simulation. And in that moment, it's kind of like maybe not those words exactly in the story when I read it, but the Dark Lord says, "Don't worry," because he will make a belief out of it. Just it's like a human being seeing a flower and picking it. When you pick the flower, it becomes lifeless. That's kind of like what a belief does to the value of a dynamic vision. It's kind of like we saw a lion, and instead of kind of letting it live as a king in its ecosystem, we dishonored the king of nature and we put it in a cage. So, man, it's another way of saying that experience is constantly contained in belief, and because we think we are the belief, we can't see beyond it. So, experience is limited in its flow and navigation. So, really, when we get to this point, it be a kind of transformation of human behavior where the behavior is not only found to have meaning in its static, subjective position, but is also seen to have meaning as the dynamism of the whole moment, which inevitably would mean when the speed of something increases, the unknown variables also do increase. The impacts and the intensity, kind of like you driving in the highway, the faster you drive, the more intense the consequences become. And this is why it's like you can see that it's like our cities, our driving won't work until we respect the laws of the city. And so many people, the youth sometimes react kind of like anarchy when they see the limitations of the cultural program, but when they see how much of law is actually required to kind of maintain stability, it's like some things you can feel. Um, how can I tell you? It's like people can't tell the earth to turn the other way. Like they can, but the earth won't turn the other way, you know? So it's as if sometimes the inner realms have to adjust to the outer realms, sometimes the outer realms have to adjust to the inner realms. When you see those United Nations advanced negotiators from different countries, those are people who they are aware of their inner realms and outer realms. I think they are some of the most enlightened kind of minds, but not more, maybe. Probably. So think of it this way: the more intelligent a species is, the more its free will is advancing beyond its limitations. Therefore, meaning that it's like rather than us thinking as we grow old, things are being taken away, we kind of realize things are being added in another way. You know, it's as if it's the evolution of a body into a pure mind, you know, into a field. And now how much we want to contain cage that field in a belief and in language. Of course, when you're conscious, you're not language. You can observe it and you become masterful with anything, because it's just like this right now. This bottle that's on the table, it's an object. Because I can observe it, I can acknowledge how its position is in three-dimensional space. I can pick it up and put it anywhere on the table. This is a sort of mastery. I am a master at moving bottles to like other part of the table, you know. So this mastery meant an instantaneous ability for the free will's effort to be externalized. Now when we go and live in society, we can't always have the inner realms, the outer realms meeting the inner realm, and you don't want to as a person. Let me tell you why. Because it's like if everybody in the world listened to you, that would be a clone, freaky clone like world. You know, people are not meant to all have the same views because we don't have the same eyes. You know, and what's even more preposterous is like how the educational system. What is it? It's like one doorway 8 billion people have to go into, when every person's eyes are different. You know, so our relationship with language is suggesting how we are containing our experiences, and once we acknowledge that we're not living in one dimension, that there is an objective realm and there's a subjective realm simultaneously, like Purusha and Prakriti in Vedic sciences. Consciousness and matter are simultaneous. And if you saw consciousness and matter as the chicken and egg kind of scenario, it's as if the response is they both simultaneously arose in a witness of a greater dimension. But that greater dimension doesn't have to be local. So that's a huge kind of implication that if even if there is a metaphysical landscape beyond our sensory perception, in that physical metaphysical landscape, there's no telling that intelligence is dual or non-dual. That means I have kind of fathomed even the potential for space to have a soul, not just matter, not just an atomic movement suggests the pattern of intelligence, you know. So we are kind of like drops of consciousness in an unconscious river, and the more we begin finding like the Tower of Babylon, we start speaking that same language. It's as if kind of like the story of the Tower of Babylon was pretty much. I think a lot of people who are listening to this, to my talk, have listened to my talks, know it, but it's pretty much the story of all human beings united under one language, trying to create this tower towards the gods. The gods see this, they make human beings speak different languages. Civilization can't progress because there's no management. So you can say anything you divide and conquer, it begins struggling to manage itself. And when people get kind of torn by emotions of their past, when intense things happen to a person's life, that experience can kind of have a subjective imprint that it occupies their attention. So you could kind of be a person who from a bike at a young age, and the next time you see an opportunity to ride a bike, you don't know why you feel sad. You know, maybe you've totally forgotten even about your childhood when you fell on a bike, but you don't know why the emotion arises, right? So that means that your attention is simultaneously somewhere else. This is why I say it's kind of one of those major Mr. Within's kind of principles, that it's like our intelligence is not in one room. So there's an objective room we're in, and then there's a subjective room. Again, how the mind in the dream state is active, even though the body is inactive, in how it appears. Like your heart is still beating. I mean, it's not, the body's not dead, but you know what I mean. So we are the evolution. Let me say it like this: evolution is how an object became a subject to itself. And that's where we are now. The most fascinating moment in history, where a species is uh, having a new relationship with how language contains it. Do you know how much it's going to be? It's such a cool time, guys. It's such a cool time to be alive. And for me, you know, YouTube is divine. I mean, if you, to whoever, like if we had a time machine and we went really back and we kind of showed YouTube videos to our ancestors, they'd be like, it's like, get out of here, you're alien. You kind of like, semi strange alien. In a book I wrote that's called The Great Work, which is one of the most mysterious books I've kind of ever written, um, at least to me, I spoke about how just like this present moment is the future self of who you were in the past. This present moment is also being the past memory of your future self. So it's a sort of relationship with fragmentations and time. And really, what it means is that I think when everybody spoke the same language in that Tower of Babylon story and was building this great tower to reach the level of the gods, the unity of the language would imply the acknowledgement of similar image. And I think that image was a future image, because if we were to kind of relate each other the content of our minds now, everybody of course has different eyes, but when we look at what we can build in the future, that can be a commonality. So strangely, that language is a future language. It's not, I don't think I don't think we have reached it, but I have a sort of feeling that it's going to be geometrical. I've said it before that it's like geometry is the next great language of all languages. And people are going to be like, all right, Mr. Within, you like design a little too much. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Really, um, three words suffice: rise, mankind, rise. That's why existence is here. That's why there is the, it seems like something. That's enough. The fact that there is something to be, that something is already being before any thought you have. There is an energetic existential presence in the moment, in a space-time continuum. Leonardo da Vinci says simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, and let me tell you what simplicity is. Gratefulness is the ultimate simplicity. Is the most ultimate simplicity. Gratefulness means wonder has not died yet in your eyes. That wonder for how life can advance, how the free will can experience its implementation in the lifetime. And really, what can the free will do? The person can move stuff with their limbs, or they can move subjects or their attention. You know, so we are creatures of attention, and really, the secrets of the universe are present in our attention. It's like, I mean, I tell people, I was born in the country Iran, but my attention is cosmic. I don't know, like, that's just to be polite. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope this episode was helpful. Much blessings and namaste.